Okay. So am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll start. So good afternoon, everyone present here. I extend a warm welcome to each one of you gathered here for Father Conceicao Rodrigues Memorial Debate 2020, and it's also known as CRMD. Thank you to each and every one of you for being here with us today. Now I'll introduce our first judge for this debate, Dr. Sudarsana Sarkar. Dr. Sudarsana Sarkar is engaged as an associate professor with NMI MS deemed to be university. She has got a bachelor's degree in human development and a master's in philosophy degree in development studies, specializing in cultural and literature studies. She has taught law and literature in National University of Juridical Sciences, Kolkata. She has academic journal publications such as Peace Education, contextualized in the corporate sector, and other such publications. She is also a poet and have published a book of poems named Life's Meanderings. Okay. Coming towards the second debate for the second judge for this debate, Dr. Khushbu Trehan. Dr. Khushbu Trehan is an assistant professor in communication skills at DJ Sanghvi College of Engineering, Mumbai. She has an Indian doctorate in Canadian literature. She is also a university topper in PhD coursework with 72%. She is a certified Dale Carnegie trainer and an emotional intelligence specialist. She has worked with various professional institutions of repute, including our very own Father Conceicao Rodrigues College of Engineering, Mumbai, as a professor of communication skills. We are delighted to have you both present here today in our midst. Now we'll welcome our adjudicator for this debate, Purav, and over to you, Craig, who will be our moderator for this debate.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, the honorable judges, the adjudicator and debater. Before we start our debate today, I kindly request all of y'all to put any handphone or device that may disturb our debate today to the silent mode. All right. Before beginning, do either of the teams have any specifications with respect to the indication of time? Because I will generally follow the 200, 300, 330 principle. Yes.
Instead of 3:30, if you could make it 3:45 and just notify us through text, please don't interrupt us while speaking.
Yes.
That's
All right. So 200, 300, and 345. If you'll
yes.
exceed the time limit, I will be interrupting you all by on call. Yes.
Yeah, that's
CMD 12, any specifications? CMD 12.
Sir, you can say around 30 seconds, last 30 seconds, like
All
that.
right. Perfect. Okay. Thank you. With that, I would like to call this debate to order. The motion before us today is the House believes that where resources are scarce, minority campaign groups should fund minority art, literature, and films rather than funding lobbying for legislative change. Representing the proposition is Team CMD 12. Representing the opposition is Team CMD 05. On behalf of the House, I would like to express a sincere welcome to our judges and the adjudicator. I will be your moderator for today's debate. Before we begin, I will quickly run through the rules. One member of the team will be opening while the other will be closing with their speeches. The opening speeches will be for 4 minutes each. The proposition begins first, which is then followed by the opposition. After which we will have a 10-minute refutation round, wherein the opposition will raise the first question to be answered by the proposition and then the orders to be followed alternatively. After each answer, the side posing the question can give a comment for a maximum of 15 seconds. All decorum must be followed during this round, and both teams are requested to respectfully answer without talking over each other. At the end of the refutation round, each side is expected to give a 15 to 20-second closing statement. This will be then followed by the closing speeches. Side opposition begins first, followed by side proposition. For each speech, only 15 seconds grace will be allowed. Heckling is strictly prohibited. I hope everybody is clear on the rules. Can I have all of y'all unmute yourselves and just respond so that I can get a mic test done with respect to everybody present here?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Perfect.
Okay.
Can you hear
Hello,
me?
sir.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, you are audible.
Okay,
Fourth
sir.
member.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Perfect. All right. With that, I would like to call upon the first
Hello?
speaker. Yes, yes, you
Hello.
are audible.
Is it audible?
Yes, yes, you are clear. All right. And with that, I'd like to call upon the first speaker from the side proposition to begin with their opening speech.
Okay, thank you. Hello, can I speak?
Yes, side proposition, begin whenever.
Hello.
Yes, side proposition.
Okay. Thank you. So, good afternoon, one and all. So today we are going to, we are the side of proposition. Hello.
Yes, proposition. He's lagging in connectivity. Side proposition, can you switch to another device before we begin?
Yes. Can I start? The voice is breaking off.
You can switch off your camera to save bandwidth.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, you can switch off your camera. Maybe then it could be, maybe then your connection will improve.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think it's possible he can't hear us. So I think if someone could type it in the chat box.
Yes, just a moment.
Hello, is it audible?
Yes, it's audible. It's audible, Mohammed.
Hello.
Hello, yes, Mohammed, it's audible. You can switch on your, off your camera if you want. Yeah.
The network problem. Range is okay.
Yes.
So good afternoon. Good afternoon, one and all. So today the motion is that the House believes that where resources are scarce, minority campaign groups should fund minority art, literature, and films rather than funding lobbying for legislative change. So I like to start with the quote of Mahatma Gandhi, quote unquote. The injustice must be shown visible. So the best way to show the injustice visibly is through art, because art can easily influence the world, and the world comes to know what is occurring in the minority society. We can represent through art what is occurring. It is rather better than shouting and yelling for rights, because the other people, rest of people, doesn't know what is occurring and why they are shouting. They things like we are animals. But when we show why through art, they can easily access it. Also, we know that when we fight injustice with injustice, what is the difference between them and us? So we want to give the world what is occurring through art. Also, our music, our feelings, and rest of art cannot be destroyed by a person, but it is easily available for the whole world. It is easily accessible. Also, when we look into Black Lives Matter, we encouraged it because, first of all, there were so many art, and they picturize and symbolize what is occurring in the US and what is occurring to the Black people. We shared it, we passed the message, and we embrace it through social media, Instagram, and etc. So it is a clear representation of it. And also, we know that the African American music, Anglo Pakistan cinema, and post colonial literature in France is the fight for their identity. And all world welcomed it with open hands. When we look with art, we can ignite the minds of people. We can show them what is occurring. And the rest of world will also encourage, and they will be like asking, oh, what is happening in this society? why they are not experiencing the right we are experiencing. So it will definitely ignite the mind, and that will reach the legislative, because all the world will be combined and united to support us, to promote us to the need we are striking for. So it definitely shows that the importance of funding the literature and films are more important than funding lobbying for legislative change. Thank you.
All right. I thank the member for his remarks. We shall now hear the opening speech from the first speaker from side opposition.
Just to reconfirm, I'm audible and visible, right?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Members of the House, the metric of this debate is extremely clear. The metric is this: on which side of the House is there greater progressive change in a resource-scarce world? And I'll illustrate to you why this is politics through a comparative of politics and art, right? I'll tell you three things for politics, why there's an inherent importance of politics to change. The second is what political obstacles exist in electoral representation. And thirdly, why lobbying is the only political recourse left for minority groups, right? Turning to the first. Now let's understand that politics is essentially the only means through which you can distribute power in society, and therefore the law that emanates from politics is the only means to create structural change, right? And this is structural change in, most importantly, economic and social relations. And more specifically in this in the context of change, it's important to remember here that the kind of stakeholders we're dealing with from the majority group, right? There are those that are our allies, there are those that are the fence sitters, and there are those that are the bigots. Now, the allies are not our targets here. We're targeting the bigots to essentially comply with us, because no form of art is going to appease them, because their only objective is to be opposed to you. So the law, in how forceful it is the only measure you have there, the law that you can pass only through politics. Similarly, with fence sitters, we tell you that the extent of concession they will make is very little, because it comes at their own cost, right? Because they're competing for these jobs, they're competing for these positions. And at the same time, they live in a world of ignorance and indifference to what the minority concerns are. So the fence sitters also won't help you. Therefore, there needs to be forceful change, which only law through politics can give you. Secondly, we tell you that you can create change in politics in two ways, right? One is electoral representation, and the second is policy making. We tell you that electoral representation for minority groups has significant obstacles, right? Firstly, the very design of electoral politics is such that majority-dominated states and areas have larger votes and larger representation. Take UP in India, for instance, right? How it has the largest contribution to Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha, and it's a group dominated by Brahmins. Right? You also take the example of Georgia, which is a white-dominated place in America, and how many votes it has, and Texas, for instance. Right? Therefore, we tell you that there are limitations to these people getting represented in the first place. And secondly, we tell you that minority voters are looked at very soft voters, right? We'll give you the example of how the Congress has treated its very loyal Muslim voter base with not too much respect, right? Because of the lack of capital and the lack of choices that these Muslim voters have, like Congress didn't really live up to its promises to them, because it knew that these voters would be voting for them anyway. We also tell you that there is a lack of collectivization within minority groups, right? This is because these minority groups are effectively competing against each other, and you're left in a situation where they also have conflicting ideologies. Like, for instance, the transgender community and the feminist movement have disagreements between each other. And we also tell you that reservations are going to be affected here, right? Because they're not enough. They normally come in the form of 5-10% concessions, and they're not wide enough. They won't include groups like Muslims or women in several states, for instance. And now I'll tell you why lobbying is the only recourse that these people have left, right? Which is essentially the fact that we make policies in a very top-down manner where public isn't consulted, and our policymakers are very ignorant. Therefore, the only way you can make your voice heard is by essentially going to the policymakers, because they aren't going to come to you. And lobbying provides you that tool because it allows you to have a representative who makes your voice heard. Now, the best case scenario that follows from this is that they understand the plight and the problems you're going through. They're no longer ignorant, and they pass policies in your favor. The worst case scenario is that there is at least a public acknowledgement of this is the representation of this community. And because of that public acknowledgement, if the legislature doesn't pass the policy in your favor, there will be public backlash against them. And there is also some conscious raising among the minority groups themselves. Now, I'll tell you why art lacks out, right? The first thing with art is that even if it reaches people, the per capita return on investment is much lower because indie productions will exist anyway. Art has a problem of censorship. Now, you see a movie like Lipstick Like Burqa, the way you can represent your ideas to get acceptance from people, that's going to be limited by the rules of the government. There is
I
also
request opposition to end.
yeah, there are all of these problems in art, and for those reasons, we tell you that politics is going to be more effective than art. Thank you.
I thank the member for his remarks. We shall now begin with the refutation round. I request side opposition to pose their first question.
Okay, I'll ask the question. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Well, side proposition, which world would you prefer to live in as a minority? One where it is legally binding on everyone to give equal rights to minorities, or one in which there are more movies and art made about minorities?
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. The question is simple. In the context of the speech, a situation where is that there are legal rights for minorities in a society, and also the other society where there are more movies, more art, more minority representation in these art forms. But the problem is that only in a society which has more representation of minority art forms, minority literature, can guarantee equal rights for minorities. If a society has representation of minority art, minority literature, minority films, it guarantees that the minority will have a specific position. Their concerns will be listened by the government. So it works the other way around, not the other way around. Please understand that the minority art, literature, and other forms of expression are evident in a society, which means that the society will have the rights for the minorities. The art is the cause for the rights. I hope I have answered your question. And also one more point to add is that political campaigns find it more easy to target religious minorities. Take for instance the Rohingya Muslims of Myanmar or the Uyghur Muslims of China. The political campaign finds it more easy to target ethnic minorities or religious minorities for the sake of own good. The only solution for that is to depict more and more their feelings through art, literature, and other dramas or films like that, as the world shows us for examples. Thank you.
Team opposition, do you have any comments?
Oh, yes. So proposition has asserted the claim that just because there are more movies and more representation of minorities in these art, there's going to be legislative change. Except that's not how it works. Just because there are movies like Lipstick Under My Burqa or Call Me by Your Name does not lead to like a bigoted government making legislative change. It's only when people come out and voice their opinion by the method of lobbying that legislative change happens.
All right. Side proposition, your next question.
We have to ask, hello, is it for us?
Yes, side proposition, yes.
Yeah, okay. So what happens is that what is lobbying, for instance? You try to influence the government to listen more to your complaints. Lobbying, we might be communicating with any higher official in the bureaucracy or the government, for instance, that you want them to listen to your problems. So how do we lobby them? It is not done by a single person or a single lobbyist. It is a collective work. So the best way to get the government listen to you is that you get the majority sympathize with you. That's what happens all around the world. Take for instance the Kurdish,
requesting
the Syrian
proposition to ask a question.
Yeah, I'm coming to that. So if you have the majority siding with you or sympathizing with you, you can solve the question of lobbying. So how can you say that politics alone can solve the problem for minorities and the minority should focus more on lobbying when in a world that the political campaigns are trying to more and more attacking the minorities?
Okay, thank you for that question. The first thing we want to make clear is that we're not saying that art shouldn't exist. We're saying the per capita return in a resource scarce world means that you spend in politics as instead of art. Now, secondly, we tell you that you can't get the sympathy of the majority community, right? And side a proposition hasn't told you that. We've told you that we live in a competitive world where majority is competing against you. They're indifferent to your world, and therefore they have an active incentive to not be sympathetic towards you. And on the other hand, we've told you that lobbying provides you a mechanism to reach out to a policymaker who makes the decision, who's otherwise ignorant to you. Movies can only point out like general broad problems that you have, right? Like for instance, if you have a particular problem regarding the sewage disposal in your community, that's not something a movie can address, right? Those specific concerns are only something that you can reach out through lobbying.
Side proposition, do you have any comments? No comments from side proposition?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. First of all, the opponent says that we want to give importance to arts also. So it even shows that the importance of arts rather than lobbying. And also, my friend says that politics is more effective than art. How it become more effective? All the reforms starts with art forms. There was renaissance for every revolution when we take. So the art form is the first thing which takes the minority to represent them.
Thank you. Team opposition, your
Yes.
next question.
We normally live in a world where people watch progressive movies, accept those progressive values, but don't incorporate them in their life. Like they accept them, but they don't make changes in their life. How are you going to ensure that after people watch, majority groups watch these movies, they will not just sympathize, but they will also change their behavior and make voluntary concessions that come at their detriment?
Okay. For the time being, imagine the situation, the art forms that depict the situation of a minority. A Syrian refugee was washed ashore. His name was Alan Kurdi. The Kurdi stands for the ethnicity. So that could influence the Canadian federal elections in 2015. So how could it influence that? A boy washed ashore, how can that influence the Canadian election? Because that the majority in some other countries, all the nations sympathize with it, and they decided that it should be a reminder of the refugee crisis. So that the art forms that this refugee boy depicted worldwide showed how we should treat the refugees. That the same case with minorities. I think you pointed out the situation of reservation there. The Delimitation Act specifies how the constituencies should be termed. From UP, we have 80 seats for Lok Sabha. It's determined by the Delimitation Act. We also have reservations. States like Kerala give 12% reservation for minority Muslim community only. We have religious reservation. Our constitution provides for linguistic and religious minorities, and they have explicit rights. So how does these rights emerge in the society? It came through various reforms, the art reforms. Our poets, our writers, they depicted the situation of minorities through their art forms, that it became evident to the government that they cannot put a blind eye on that. So it leads to reforms. For example, let me tell you, if you focus more on art, art means knowledge. It's mean knowledge, literature, everything means knowledge. Because the Muslim community in India, they are more illiterate than the national average. The Muslim illiteracy is around 43%. The poverty rate is around 43%, while the national average is around 39%. So if you give more education, art, literature, and films empathize education in sense. For it can give the same effects or can give the more effects than you lobby. Let me tell you one more example. If you lobby, what happens is that the more lobbying you do, the more polarized society get. In a specific constituency, there are more minority population. It seems like that the minority candidate will win, a candidate from the minority community. So that's the election situation in India. So the voters get more polarized if you go for lobbying in politics alone. The minority votes for the minority candidate, majority votes for majority candidate. That's the result of lobbying. But if you use art for that, the minority, the majority, they can come together, sympathize with each other through art, and they can solve their problems. So lobbying can be done through art. That's the main point I have to consider.
All right. Team opposition, do you have any comments?
Yes, I'll try to quickly address that through quick responses. The first is that the example of Canada that you gave isn't really an apt example, because firstly, Canada is a more liberal and tolerant country than most stakeholders that we're talking about. And secondly, even the example that you cited has led to significant backlash regarding immigration in Canada itself. So that example itself doesn't stand. As regards reservation and how they're effective, I have already covered in my speech how they're too less numerically and they're not wide enough to include all communities. And thirdly, regarding, like, let's say the knowledge that you spoke about that art gives you, we tell you that will exist in our side of the house anyway, because the structural change that you create through law and politics will lead to, let's say, greater access to education to someone, because now the law says that this minority group should have education, greater access to resources for that education, and therefore actually you achieve greater knowledge and education on our side of the house, because the law can give you much greater access than any random art form can.
All right, thank you. Team proposition, your question.
I'll answer that question in a short time. Our constitution provides reservation for linguistic and religious minorities. There are many types of minorities, ethnic like that. So when you focus on the educational aspect and the lobbying aspect, the minorities can administer and perform, they can establish education institutions of their choice. So what happens that if you give reservation, you spoke of reservation and I spoke of 12% Muslim reservation and all like that. If you give reservation, there should be someone to have the fruits, to bear the fruits. The unemployment rate and the illiteracy rate is high among our minority community. So if you give more and more
proposition to state a question, please.
Okay, if you give more and more reservation to them, the seats gets vacant. There is nobody to bear the fruits. So if we rely more on lobbying, if you rely more on lobbying, it means that you're reserving, you are more ending up more polarizing. Education can only solve that, and our constitution provides for that. So how can you bypass that provision for the minority community, ending up only in a political sense? It will end up in a political situation only. That is not good for the minorities. How can you overcome that situation?
Okay, two pointed responses to what you had to say. The first thing on reservations, firstly, it's factually incorrect that we have reservations for linguistic minorities. We don't. And the other thing is that they only have some additional support that the state gives them. But more importantly, we need to recognize that there is a 50% cap to which you can have reservations that can legally exist. Imagine that you have easily 8 to 10 different minority groups that we've spoken about in this debate, each of them competing for this 50%. How much representation do they end up getting? And how many of these groups are even ignored from this reservation in the first place, right? Secondly, we tell you that we acknowledge the fact that education is important, right? And like I pointed out earlier, you get greater access to education through law, right? Because what will the law do? It will first give you an entitlement to sit in a classroom. It will ensure that you have greater access to, let's say, a textbook, a teacher. It will ensure that you have access to midday meals as well, right? Those entitlements that come with education around it, that's not something that you can get through the sympathy of the upper class, right? That's only something that the state can guarantee to you given the amount of resources that it has.
Team proposition, do you have any comments? Please keep your comments concise.
Okay, the problem is that the art can influence society. It can change the whole concept of thinking. We means that when I spoke of reservation and like, we categorize minorities based on that, the linguistic minority and the religious minority. The society sympathizes with them. The society doesn't mean that all the upper classes have not to sympathize with them. The result of their sympathization was through the art forms, our literature, our movies, and our plays that got radically depicted the situation of the minorities in India that forced them to have a political lobby. It resulted from the art form. It's not the other way around. If you depict the situation of minorities through art, if you promote minority art, minority literature, minority languages, that's what the linguistic minority is. If you promote these minority linguistic art, literature, and films, you can guarantee the basic rights to them, not by the other way around.
We ask a question.
All right. Thank you. I think we're up with time. We are now at the end of the refutation round. I request one speaker from each side to give a concise closing statement. Opposition going first.
Sure. So repeatedly we've heard from side proposition that somehow art is going to drive political change, and they talked about reservation. But understand that there is a logical link missing because they haven't explained how art will lead to this political change. They've only made that assertion, they've only made that claim. They haven't given substantial analysis to like substantiate that argument. So without that analysis, that argument cannot stand. So unless they explain to us how exactly is this art going to lead to legislative change, their arguments cannot stand.
Team proposition.
Hello.
Yes.
Oh. So is it audible?
Yes, yes, you are.
Okay. So this guy says that when the law comes, everything becomes all right. But the law doesn't change the minds of majority people. We know that there are many famous people and persons who are treated like below people and minority even after the law comes, because the art can only change the minds of majority, and it reflected in the case of many things, and it can change the person's mindset. Then only the importance of law is there, and the art will lead to the change. That's all. Thank you.
I thank each side. We now begin with the closing speeches. I call upon side opposition to begin with their closing speech.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, yes, you are audible.
I'll begin then. Good evening, everyone. Slavery was not abolished by means of art. Slavery was abolished by means of a legislative change. Women got the right to vote by means of legislative change. It did not happen because of art. Let's understand that this debate is set in a context where there is resource scarcity. So think about countries like sub-Saharan African countries or Middle Eastern countries where minority groups have very limited funding. Now they have to make a value judgment as to whether they should invest this money into lobbying to get the change that they want, or should they invest this money into art. We'll explain to you why this money is better spent on legislative change or lobbying than spent on art. Firstly, and most importantly, understand that art is anyway going to exist. We are not denying that art can maybe drive social change to an extent, even though we contend that lobbying will bring about greater, faster, and more effective change. We'll get to that later. But understand that art has a tendency of self funding. Understand that minority groups can still produce art even if the production quality of that art is limited, even if the equipment that they use to, let's say, make a movie, even if the actors or the creative directors that they hire are not the most popular ones, even if they spend little money on that, art is still going to be created, and the subject matter or the driving force of that art is still going to be in the mainstream. Because when that artist makes revenue, he can reinvest that revenue into making that art. But lobbying, on the other hand, cannot function when there is no funding. Understand that lobbying requires a lot of money. You need a lot of money to like get your word out there, to gather public support, to collectivize people, to like gather their support and take their collective voices to the people. Oh, this is, by the way, not a new point. This is building on the speech that my fellow speaker first gave. The point he raised about art being self-funded. This is not a new point. In any case, lobbying is something that requires a lot of money. When you go to a political leader, when you go to a legislator, you have to show them through research, through data, that there are so many people from a certain group who support a certain political change. Now, even if this change does not come about, as long as it is there in public discourse, there is going to be consciousness raising. So everything that's going to be done through art is also going to be done through legislative change. Then they've constantly claimed that somehow art is going to drive like legislative change, but understand it's actually the other way around. It is law that controls how art and artists work. I'll give you three examples to explain why this is so. Think about education and textbook. Like education is the example that they give. It is law and like these legislators which determine what kind of books will be there in the curriculum of school kids. They determine what kind of history would be taught. They determine what kind of economic theories would be taught. But if legislative change is not made in the right direction, they can restrict access to minority art. So literature books cannot have like voices of these minorities. They cannot have stories about like black people or lower caste people if law does not permit so. Therefore, you need law first, and then art will follow. Secondly, my first speaker talked about censorship, right? When as we see even today that movies which like go against the prevalent mainstream narrative, movies like Lipstick under the Burqa, the legislators and the majority has the power to censor that out, to like prevent that from going out in the public in the first place. So even if you fund art, as long as that art does not get like access by people because it has been censored, there is no use of that art. Therefore, lobbying becomes more important, becomes your primary priority. Thirdly, we talked about equality and opportunities in jobs. Understand that any artist is going to be working under a culture of like art, of an industry. So if you're a movie maker, you'll be working in Bollywood. It is only through law that you can guarantee like equality of respect, equality of right to free speech, equality of opportunities in these jobs, whether you're any kind of minority, whether you're a woman, whether you're an LGBTQ, whether you're a black person or a lower caste person. As long as this equality does not exist, the kind of art that you can create and like drive social change from that is also going to be restricted. Therefore, it is more important to invest this money into legislative change and lobbying than to invest it in art, because art is anyway going to exist. Lobbying requires money. Without money, lobbying will not exist, and every benefit that we talked about is going to be absent. For all those reasons, we are very, very proud to propose.
I thank the member for his remarks. I now call upon side proposition to begin with their closing speech.
Okay, so thank you. So the question here is that the concern of minorities, how can they represent the concern to the government? How can they step up in society? There are two ways, the political lobbying and also the forms of art, media and communication. So what is the primary aim? You have to communicate your concerns. You opt for lobbying and you opt for art. So we think of the two ways that you influence government. From the time being, the political scenarios like that, it's easy to target the linguistic minorities and the ethnic minorities like that. So the only form by which they can represent their concern is through art. And let me remind you of something, art is permanent. The government and the political machinery is temporary. You invest 5 crore to win an election, a certain specific handful of seats, you lose it in the next election, it's temporary. But there's some famous villain dialogue is that they can steal our land, they can steal our money, but they can't steal our knowledge. And I'm just elaborating on that. Okay, art is permanent. It's not a new point we have raised before. And so when we have knowledge among us, art, literature, and movie is knowledge. I reminded you in the first speech itself. It is knowledge. It is not like that we go to school and in the sideline we learn art. We learn the knowledge is imparted upon the minorities. The situation here is that the majority communities have had greater access to knowledge and other facilities, so they have greater access to government machinery. What we need to provide is that we need to empower the minorities, not by making them politically powerful by selecting a handful of representatives. We need to make them powerful by giving them knowledge, imparting them knowledge through the forms of art, through the forms of media, through the forms of communication. So the knowledge can help them win the lobby. They can give the same effect of lobbying like that. So the machinery context is clear. So when we give the minorities the rights to express their forms in arts, the lobbying, etc., like that, can the government control them? Sure, the government can decide whether to do or that. For an example that I previously stated, there are many examples. For instance, the government bans a new form of art by the minorities. It doesn't mean that it vanishes. The art is permanent. Even though the government bans it, the majority can sympathize with it by all the means they can. And the law doesn't come out of the heaven like a sudden. The law formation requires several steps. The first step is the acknowledgement of the rights, acknowledgement of the right of the minorities that result in the lawmaking, which help the minorities. So the acknowledgement comes from the fact that there should be an eye opener for the legislator. The eye opener comes from the fact that the majority sympathizes with them. The voters sympathize with the minority cause. Take, for example, the Forest Rights Act and the other rights that the minority enjoys now. It came as a result of the majority people sympathizing with them and showing the government that their rights have to be upheld. So that is the art becomes the source of communication. It allows people from different aspects to be together. What happens if you lobby is that you polarize society. A certain handful of minority voters in a region vote for the minority candidate only, and the minority rights are upheld. But it polarizes society. The communal issues escalates. Take the example for Rohingya Muslims and the Uyghur Muslims. The community tensions escalate between groups. Take the case of our land itself. The Muslim illiteracy and the unemployment rates are high. How can reservation benefit a community when there is high rate of unemployment and illiteracy? So we need education. Education comes in the form of art. So the scarcity of resources at hand, art is a mean of communication that can allow people from different societies, different majorities, different minorities to come together and sympathize with each other. There have been many movements around the world. One example I will cite is that the Communist Party of Kerala, they had been banned, but they used art as a form of literature, their form of communication, and they could form the political government through their art. So the art can function as a soul for the realizing of political rights. But political rights cannot guarantee artistic freedom. But artistic freedom can guarantee political rights. That's the most important point you have to bear in mind. And also the art for social change has been widely discussed from the time that man became a civilized man. The art for social change have been emanated in every aspect of our life, whether it is any types of literature. Art has helped minorities realize their rights. The spreading of minority rights, they become aware of their rights through art and literature, and it has helped them to be in the forefront of our society. So while art itself cannot make laws, okay, while art itself cannot make laws, it can empower the legislator. It can be an eye opener for the legislator who makes the laws for the minority communities. So the art forms the basis for all of that. Thank you.
I thank the member for his remarks. With this, we come to the end of the debate. I thank both the teams for their conduct today. We are now open to any questions and constructive comments from the judges and the adjudicators.
Okay, again, thank you for the second round of, I think I'm looking at the same people. Okay, the first question goes to the proposition. So if there is a lobbying for legislative change, it can create environments to promote art and culture for the minority. So I think one of the speakers finally said that the allowance of promotion of art and culture, so the legal allowance of allocating a budget for such promotion of art and culture for further amendments in law to happen in the favor of the minority. Do you agree or not agree? Proposition.
Ma'am, can you repeat the question? That we need amendments in law?
Yeah. No, what I'm telling you is that, see, if you said, particularly, I think you have been mentioning this repetitively, that this art and culture should be promoted to bring around laws in favor of the minority. So if that needs to happen, firstly, there should be an allocation of budget, and that will come through a legal process. First, the legal process in place, allocation budget happens, promotion of art and culture happens, and then the further amendment of laws in the favor of minority can happen. My question is, do you agree with this or not?
I don't agree with that, ma'am, because government funds are not a prerequisite for a culture or minority culture to thrive. They can have their own funds. Then they need to get the government realize that we are a minority, we have certain rights, and our culture is this. We are different from the majority. Only then specific government funds starts coming from the center. So for that, we have minority fundings. The funds that they use for lobbying can be used to promote their art, and hence that art can get the recognition, and hence it gets more funds. But if you go for lobbying, the political scenario is temporary, but the art is permanent.
Okay, thank you. Again, for the opposition, the question comes up. For you is like now research says that culture influences law. Okay, otherwise there is a distortion in the laws made in the land. It has so happened that there has been imposition of Western law on indigenous cultures. Again, the distortion in the laws created have happened. What is your take on this?
Ma'am,
I'll repeat it again. Research says that a culture influences law. Otherwise, there is a distortion in the laws made in the land. It has so happened that there has been imposition of Western law on indigenous cultures. Again, the distortion in the laws created have happened. What is your take on this?
Ma'am, we completely agree with that idea. It has happened in a lot of countries that Western culture has sort of taken over indigenous culture, and people they don't take pride in their own culture as much as they would like to relate to this foreign Western culture. But the solution to that is not funding art at the price of not funding lobbying. So this motion is set in a context where there is resource scarcity. So when you have limited amount of money, you have to decide where would you rather spend it. We saying that indigenous art is still going to exist. Like if an indigenous artist makes some art, let's say he writes a book, let's say he makes a movie, even if it does not earn a lot of money, it's going to earn some money because those minority people will still watch it and consume that.
No, but the imposition of Western law is trying to eradicate almost the indigenous cultures. I mean, so how indigenous culture can influence now the laws of the land with the Western law is so kind of powerful, and people are so, general people, I should say urbanized people are so much in acceptance of that kind of an influence. So how can they now what will happen? Like indigenous cultures anyway will be wilting away. There is no scope and opportunity. Even if they promote their art and culture, how they're going to go against with such a huge barricade? How do you kind of?
Ma'am, so if any kind of Western law is trying to force its will on indigenous,
Every kind of the entire legal system is westernized. My entire education, Western education has influenced our legal system. Our legal system has been adopted from the English legal system. So.
yeah. Ma'am, I think the solution to that, even if you can't completely remedy that situation, the best solution would be to again make legislative change. You bring the indigenous people together, you lobby their support, and you take that support to legislators and you tell them that this is what this group wants, that this is what they'll vote for, and then it becomes part of public discourse. So in the parliament, when it starts getting discussed, it will start getting political traction. It might become a point of political agenda. So in the elections, this might become a talking point, and the opposition can maybe get the votes of that indigenous community. And if the opposition comes into power, then they can make laws which like sort of change this narrative of Western influence and Western dominance, and give like an equal position of power and equal position of access to also indigenous art.
Okay, thank you. That is all from my side. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Khushbu ma'am, any questions?
Hello, Khushbu ma'am, are you online?
Yeah, I'm here. I
Yeah.
don't have any question from my side.
Okay, ma'am. Purav, sir, you can take over.
Uh, Hi guys. First of all, congratulations on making it to the quarterfinals. I've had the privilege of adjudicating both teams in separate rounds. Uh, it was certainly a very engaging debate. There were no, I mean, there weren't a lot of parallels, but I think the primary contention that this debate boils down to is, does art necessarily lead to any actionable change in society? And I'm not going to talk about uh, which side I'm leaning on at the end of this debate, because that would render the result. I'm going to talk about what each side did for me and what they could have possibly done better, or what are some arguments that either sides could have made, right? So from proposition, I hear uh, art is a method of showing injustices or making injustices apparent. That art is uniquely placed within society because it's easily accessible. It's not largely pedantic, is what I understand. And then they give me the example of Black Lives Matter as a bedrock of Black art. Also, art as provocation through their opening speech. These are in sort of isolation what I heard. From opposition, I hear that. Uh, is a clear, concise understanding of what this debate hinges on, which is the metric. And I think you could have defined the metric from proposition as well. I don't think it's a bad characterization of the metric by any stretch of the imagination. And so their metric is greater progressive change, and whichever side has greater progressive change in society wins this debate. What I hear from side opposition then is policy is the only recourse for structural change, and that electoral and policy electoral democracy is rigged in a certain way where majorities get have the are uniquely placed to make their voices heard. Uh, and I think one example that you could have used, although it's not very important, was gerrymandering, which would have made it like amply clear what you were trying to say, right? Uh, uh, then opposition talks to me about lack of collectivization, how within this ambit of, for example, say if there is 50% reservation, then a large number of people are fighting for to get this reservation and fit into this 50%. And necessarily these people are larger than 50% of the population. And the only way to make your voice heard is through policies and how art is censored and there's low return of investment. What they also do in their opening speech, and this is something that I think proposition could have done, is talk about scarcity, right? This is largely not a factual or a constructive debate, but a characterization debate. How do you characterize this motion in your favor? And scarcity is something that could have been characterized on both ends. So they characterize it by saying that, look, we have less money and we think policy is more actionable. So we're going to use this money for policy change. On proposition, what could have been said was this, right? Minorities, as also characterized by opposition, already have very little money to begin with, or very little resources to begin with. And we from proposition think that there are big enough players in the lobbying industry for this money to make absolutely no indentation within the political fabric, which is to say that this amount of money is not going to fight against, say, Bayer or like American Medical Association or American Hospital Association, and whatever, and however they're diametrically opposed to our minority interests, right? And so we think that in the presence of this little money, we think that art is what we need to do, and that pushes scarcity to your end, and that's why I say it's a characterization debate. So in rebuttal round, we hear a loaded question from side opposition, uh, which again, proposition really answers pretty well, in my opinion. And now this debate in the rebuttal round becomes about whether or not you need majority sympathy to bring about actionable policy change, right? So from proposition, what I keep hearing is that no matter what, you need the majority to sort of collectively rally behind you. So you need the Brahmin, that 5% Brahmin that captures 60% of higher education and government jobs, to necessarily fight for your rights. Otherwise, this is just a moot, moot Yeah, I think that's amply clear. But on opposition, what I hear is you don't necessarily need majority rights. You can still collectively come together and fight for your rights through lobbying. Again, this is something I don't want to say which side I'm leaning on, because also that this was a major contention within the debate. Uh, I think two interesting ideas that come, but very late within proposition. If they had come earlier on, I think this would have been an even more engaging debate. Having said that, it's still very engaging. One was lobbying leads to polarization within the political fabric. I think that was an excellent point to make, and should have come earlier, because that would have given you a chance to analyze it further. And this is something that I think was very, very pertinent to this debate, but this came in your closing speech, which was art is permanent, that art is resilient and can traverse time and space, as opposed to lobbying, which is very specific and fades away with that one like policy that you've passed, right? I'm not going to penalize side proposition for making that point, but I'm also not going to credit them with it, because it came in too late for them to analyze it. I think an idea or a concession that side opposition makes, uh, and I think proposition should have picked up on this, was this, right? They're operating in a world where minorities don't have enough resources, and they've painted a picture of minorities that are particularly disadvantaged, but they also envisage a world where art still exists within minority communities. Understand that to make a film or to like have actionable art, you necessarily need substantial resources, and that's a characterization that proposition could have picked up and flied with. But I and there were some inklings, but that didn't necessarily happen. Another, and I'm just going to quickly uh, conclude with this. I think one idea that proposition brings about but never analyzed was this idea of uh, art being a tool to empower lobbying, which is also a good idea to make. I think if you used examples like, for example, the Farm Security Administration or Department of Agriculture during the 1940s and 50s, what they did was they commissioned photographers to go in rural America and click pictures of rural workers as a tool to empower lobbying, a tool to empower policy in their favor. And it did necessarily work for rural workers. So there is the work. I mean, there's a very famous picture called Migrant Mother by Dorothy Lang, or American Gothic. And those are necessarily examples where art did influence policy. And I think even bringing an example like that, and I think you did bring up an example where you said that, the communist government in Kerala got re-elected using art, but I didn't necessarily understand how that happened. But an actionable example would have uh, made up for the offset of analysis. Also, one small uh, critique for side proposition, which I think they can rectify very easily. I only heard one speaker spoke a lot more than the other speaker. And so perhaps what you could do in successive rounds is think about, or perhaps other debates also, is to like manage how much you are speaking, because there are individual scores for individual speakers. And even, I mean, they, and that sort of, in the mechanics of the format, might not help your case. So maybe perhaps do that. But very good debate nonetheless. Congratulations to both teams.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
So that brings us to the end of this debate. So any more questions the team have? Any more questions the judges have?
I had one. Will the results
Yeah.
be announced today or tomorrow morning?
It will be out by night today.
Perfect.
Okay. Okay.
Will the motion be out tonight as well or tomorrow?
Regarding that, I have to still confirm, but I'll let you know regarding that.
All right. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Yes, welcome. Okay, so the teams can leave the meet right now. And the judges and the adjudicator can fill the score sheet. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are, Emmanuel. You are
Yes,
audible.
yes. Thank you so much,
Yes, Pankaj,
Sudarshana
you have
ma'am.
yeah.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
think I've already done it. Like, yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much, Kushbu, ma'am. Thank you so much, Purav, sir. So this will be the end of debate, and you all also can leave. Thank you, ma'am.
Is it the same link as before?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's the same link as before.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Kushbu, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. You can fill the score sheet, the link what I send you, and you can leave this meet right now. Thank you,
Yeah.
ma'am.
I'm just filling it right away.
Yes, ma'am.